This is another engineer task video. On this one, we're going back to the former Yugoslavia. I promised you that there was another video coming out on this one on some of their roadblocks. And here you go. I got some pictures straight out of the call manual or call booklet that came out in the mid-90s. Decided that instead of writing them or drawing them on the board, it's better to just show you the pictures straight out of there. I just increased their size. Now, just to review for those of you that have forgot, most of the mines and booby traps used during the civil wars in the former Yugoslavia were emplaced by people who were not trained in landmine warfare or booby trap warfare. These were people who got just a basic understanding on how a mine works and how to put it in the ground, and they were putting them out with no real thought to them. They weren't really thinking about sympathetic detonation or, you know, not trying to create a massive, huge explosion to destroy the entire area with a single blast. They weren't thinking on, you know, just taking out one part of the demining crew, get them nervous, that they slow down, you know, increase that amount of time during the clearance operations. And that's really obvious when you read through on how some of these roadblocks were put in. Now, there was no standardized pattern on this, but there are some things that were noted by the deminers that were kind of commonalities that they would come across. First off, on the roadblocks, they were typically tied in with other types of obstacles, non-explosive obstacles, such as hedgehogs or dragon's teeth. Now, the difference between the two, dragon's teeth are typically made out of concrete. They're kind of pyramid shaped, meant to throw a tank off to its side, kind of unbalance it. Hedgehogs are made out of typically out of steel, either I-beams, railroad tracks. I have seen them being made out of poured concrete. I have also seen pictures of them being made out of logs and chained together. Those don't really stop tanks anymore, but they do mess up wheeled vehicles and prevent them from passing. Now, the mines that were located with those obstacles were typically surface laid on the roadway that anyone approaching would see that they were there. That's just a visual warning. They weren't necessarily trying to take out a vehicle that's ramming through the obstacle, though it would do that. It was to scare the enemy to change their path. So what they would do is on the bypasses around the obstacle, the areas where the enemy could potentially bypass, in those bypasses is where they would bury anti-tank mines and anti-personnel mines. So that the enemy would see this up here. Well, we could potentially bypass over here. Well, let's bypass over here. They hit a couple anti-tank mines, and now both routes are closed off. If they would decide to, the approaching enemy troops would decide to dismount infantry to cut through, maybe remove these mines, remove the obstacles. These obstacles were typically tied into anti-personnel mines on the side, or they would have buried anti-personnel mines on the side for if the troops are trying to go around it. They'd take out a chunk of their leg. If they try moving part of the obstacle, moving one of these hedgehogs, they may not notice that there's tripwire tied to the bottom of it going to a stake mine hidden in the bushes nearby. They start moving the hedgehog, stake mine goes off. Essentially about the same strength as a 60 millimeter mortar or a hand grenade going off in close range. Now, another thing that was noticed is that the mines were typically daisy chained to each other with det cord. And depending on the type of mine that was employed, I could see this one being primarily the TM Alpha 3s, TM Alpha 4s. It had a note that the deck cord would have a large deck cord knot on the end of it directly underneath the mine. Remember, the TM Alpha 3s and the TM Alpha 4s, these were essentially cheese wheels of explosives covered in plastic or covered in paper to protect the explosive, keep it from falling apart. And that was typically a fairly thin covering over that explosive. So in that case, a really large deck cord knot, say at least the size of a Yule knot, directly underneath the mine. The ground is focusing all that pressure. Once the explosion would happen up into the bottom of the mine, it would set the mine off. Another note is anti-tank mines would have tripwires attached to them. Tripwires running to nearby anti-personnel stake mines or Prom 1 bounding fragmentation mines on the side of the road. So you'd come in, you grab the mine to try to move it out of the way. Maybe there's a crack in the road. There's a tripwire attached to that mine. That tripwire is hidden in that crack in the roadway. Tripwire goes to a stake mine on the side of the road or to a Prom 1 bounding fragmentation mine, a bouncing Betty. You kick that mine out of the way, you pick it up, you pull it, you move it, you pull that tripwire, it pulls the pin on the fuse on that mine, on the side, it goes off. Okay, another note is you could have visible anti-tank mines even on the bypass. And then unbeknownst to you, you could have to travel past multiple anti-personnel mines before you even get to the anti-tank mine that you see sitting on the ground. So the anti-tank mine is kind of the bait, trying to lure that deminer in, that enemy soldier. You know, he's thinking, hey, this is simple, I can clear this mine. Not really paying attention, and then steps on a PM Alpha 1 or a PM Alpha 2 or PM Alpha 3, blows off the lower part of their leg. Another thing that they came across was mines would be stacked on top of each other with some space between the mines, and then there would be booby trap fuses attached to those two mines. So the one that's attached, that's on the bottom, would be upside down. Booby trap device, like a MOV series fuse, would be into a secondary fuse well on the bottom of the mine. And then you would do the same thing to the same type of mine that would be placed over the top of it. You would attach tripwire to it going from the pole pins on both booby trap fuses. The deminer comes in, doesn't pay attention, grabs the mine that's on top, picks it up, pulls it. Well, as he's doing that, he sets off two booby trap devices, one on each anti-tank mine. Setting them off and vaporizing the deminer. Another note was some obstacles. You would have kind of a layer. You'd have the dragons, you'd have the hedgehogs, mines, and then maybe farther back you'd have a berm across the roadway. Inside that berm, they would have anti-tank mines. These mines would be fused. They weren't meant to be set off with pressure. What was meant is if the enemy would just push through with some type of mine plow, when they would get up to the berm and they'd start pushing the berm out of the way, one of those mines hidden inside that berm would get activated by the vehicle with the mine plow attached to it. Go off, disabling the vehicle. Now, some of the patterns we've seen here from the manual, we have the roadway, we have our obstacle of hedgehogs going across the road, we have visible anti-tank mines here going across at an angle, We have a bypass route here. This side was a hillside, no easy bypass. The only easy bypass was on this side. Inside the bypass, near the start of it, almost on line from the other mines going across, you had a cluster of anti-tank mines. Now the hedgehogs here had tripwire or some type of wire rope, not really big, attached to each hedgehog going across. Could also be barbed wire. And then attached to that wire going across to the hedgehogs, you have tripwire going off to a PMR stake mine of some type over here, PMR2 or PMR3, one on each side. And then you had the repeat on the back row of the obstacle here. And to add some more complexity to it, you also had tripwire running from the stake mines on the sides between each other. So if you come into here, you start pushing or pulling the hedgehogs out of the way so that you can get at the anti-tank mine. You set off the stake mines on the side, and then at the same time you also pull the pins on the stake mines back here, which also set them off. So basically it'd be like you're clearing the obstacle and you have a massive mortar barrage going off at that time. That's what it would be pretty much like. So, and then these mines in the roadway, if they were able to, if there was a hole in the road underneath it, especially the mine farther back here, you would have some type of booby trap attached to it underneath. You may not notice it. You see this is all asphalt here. You figure, hey, there can't be anything underneath here. You'll just push this mine out of the side, not knowing that there's a small hole underneath it. Push that mine off to the side, and then you end up setting off, say, a Prom 1 bounding fragmentation mine with a different type of fuse on it that was attached to that anti-tank mine. Or it could be a pressure release type fuse that was attached to it. This obstacle here, hedgehogs, and then farther back, just some surface laid mines. And then each of these mines were tied together with tripwire, a thicker tripwire or a wire rope again. And then that would run off to a series of stake mines a little bit farther back. You start moving these mines, you move one of them or, you know, all of them, whatever. You start disturbing these, you end up pulling the fuse on the stake mine here, it goes off. And then a little bit farther back, you think you've cleared the obstacle up here. Farther back on the roadway, you have more stake mines hidden on the sides of the roads, directly across from each other with tripwire going between the two of them. So the deminers going through or the patrols going through, that person or vehicle that's going ahead doesn't see the tripwire, doesn't notice it, and then sets off a stake mine on both sides of them. Now you could potentially also have mud, claymore type mines also involved in this, where it could be you had the stake mine on one side, a mud on the other, say hidden on the side of the hill, maybe dug into it a little bit, just buried a little bit behind the dirt. Has a booby trap fuse to it, you pull the tripwire there. You got a directional mine going off on one side that's maybe going across the roadway to hit behind the person who activates the tripwire up here. He's getting taken out by this mine. The claymore here is angled to this direction, so this one's taken out by this mine. Claymore goes off here, takes out anyone who's behind them in the patrol or vehicle or whatever's behind it. So those are some of the tactics that were encountered by deminers in Bosnia, Croatia, and the other areas of the former Yugoslavia when they're clearing the mines after the fighting was done. No rhyme or reason to it, no set patterns, but they did notice that there were some tactics that were a little bit more common than others. Basically, whatever you did on that obstacle, you were going to set something off, which makes clearing that type of obstacle very nerve-wracking and takes an extremely long period of time, because you have to check everything, double check everything to make sure you didn't miss anything. And by removing one part of the obstacle, you don't end up setting off something you didn't notice. Takes a long time. Mines like this that are surface laid, how you would clear those: either attach a grapnel hook and rope to it, or what we used to do when we trained for this, we would take some engineer tape or some type of rope or 550 cord. We'd make a big loop on it, a noose, tie that around the mine, back off from the mine, and we'd start pulling the mine to us. You want to be at least 25 meters away, preferably 50 to 100, before you start pulling that mine out of its position. If you can get that mine pulled at least 10 meters away from where it was, well, it probably didn't have a booby trap on it. If there was a booby trap on it, even after you checked it, as you're pulling it out of the way, if it goes off, you're far enough back, you're probably not going to hit by the fragmentation. The mines on the bypasses, because most of them were low metallics, even as you're scanning them or scanning for them with the mine detectors, you still had to go through and probe all the way along to make sure there wasn't a low metallic mine there that you missed with the mine detectors. Now, with the stake mines and that stuff on the sides attached to tripwires, you have to double check what type of fuse is attached to it. Is it a tension release or is it a pull? If it is a pull, you make sure that, all directions of the tripwire here, that the other tripwires attached to it also do not go to a tension release. If it is just a pull fuse, you clip the tripwires to it and then go through and neutralize that fuse. If it is a tension release, really the only thing you can do on that is attach something fairly light to it, like some engineer tape. Tie it off loosely over the tripwire. Make sure you got a good knot on that engineer tape. Back off, once again, at least 25 meters, preferably 50 to 100. Make sure you're behind cover. Pull on that engineer tape or that 550 cord to set off that mine. Tension release tripwires are very nasty. You don't want to mess with them. It actually says in the manuals in the U.S. military, do not attempt to ever disarm a tension release tripwire. Just go through and destroy it in place. But if you're able to, depending on the type of fuse, and you can't set it off because of where this obstacle is located at, if you're able to, get a piece of wire or the safety pin in there to neutralize that fuse, and then do the same to any others that are on that have a similar type of tension release fuse before you go through and clip the tripwires and pray to God. So, trying to think of if there's any other tips that we were told on this stuff. Obviously, you could clear it by just being inside a heavy armored vehicle, a tank with a mine plow, but that's where you end up with situations like this, where they may have thought of you trying to do that. So we did have vehicles that we did come out with for using inside Bosnia for clearing some of this type of stuff. That's where you came out with the smaller mine flails and that type of stuff. We also had a thing called the Panther, which was an M60 class tank chassis. It was hooked up to robotic controls that someone could sit off on the side with, you know, robotic controls looking through a camera that was mounted on the front of this tank chassis. And then in front of the tank chassis, you had either a mine roller or a dozer, and you just drove it forward by remote control. It was a giant it's not UAV. There's another term for it for the ground vehicle. I think it's UGV or something along those lines, where the vehicle is going through, it's doing its actions while you're off on the side, away from anything that could potentially go wrong. So there you go. That's some of the tactics on Yugoslav roadblock obstacles. Now, for all my engineer brothers and the Patriot militia movements, always remember essayons.